Napoleon Bonaparte once said, "China is sleeping giant. Let her sleep, for when she wakes, she will change the world." Keep this in mind as we discuss today the application of China's Digital Yuan and what it will mean for the global economy and global finance. My name is Dr. David Waralu.
And my name is Dr. Ross Stewart.
And you are watching Geopolitics in Conflict.
Napoleon Bonaparte was a smart guy because the giant has awakened.
Indeed.
In the month of September, China started dramatically increasing its imports. And with the world economy recovering back from COVID-19, it again is resuming its export business, and it's growing rapidly. And so what we're seeing now is their rollout of the Digital Yuan. And we did a show on this before, but boy, have we got a lot more good information about it. And they're doing it in Shenzhen province, and it has global impact and financial impact that we're going to talk about right now.
That's correct, Ross. Indeed, China did launch the application of the Digital Yuan as of last Friday. And it was about like $1.5 million, the equivalency to 10 million won. And they want to try it just in 4 cities in Shenzhen province. Basically, they wanted to see how it's going to work before they launch it domestically and before they launch it globally.
They're actually pretty smart the way they're doing this, because they're trying it on a small basis to work the bugs out. And they're actually doing a public relations terrifically good job, because they're involving the Chinese people in the rollout. So X number of people are getting approximately $200. They work the bugs out, but now the Chinese people are intimately involved in the process, and everyone knows it.
Well, that is a smart approach. If you are advising the government, and you will advise them to involve the citizens into decisions like that. I mean, our government, we're debating the digital dollar behind closed doors in Congress. Majority of Americans do not even know about it till they're going to launch it in January 2021. And we're going to have a show about that particular point, because the impact, the tremendous impact is going to have on everyone in this country.
It's actually going to be quite profound, but that's for later. Right now we're looking at how the Chinese Communist Party is doing the right things in terms of let's get it right, and let's make sure that people are really involved in this thing. So there's not going to be a surprise.
No, it won't. And because the whole idea of this, of course, this will have 2 main impacts. One of them on a domestic level, and one of them on a global. Well, on the domestic level is the idea of incorporate everybody into the process as they grow after the trial, because the trial's going to succeed one way or the other. This is not a question of if, but rather when.
Right.
On the global level, you're looking at this from, again, 2 other main aspects. One of them is geopolitical, and the other one is economic, /finance.
How are the other countries going to respond to this?
Well, geopolitically, this one's going to change the dynamics between countries as far as relationships and politically speaking. Now you start to think in terms of, do I want to trade with that country? And because of the changing dynamics into the global finance, and that's going to impact the political outlook as to how every country is going to start to think in terms. So geopolitically speaking, the implication of the Digital Yuan on a global scale will have a major impact.
We know that a number of financial institutions around the world have responded rapidly to this.
Well, as a matter of fact, when China launched the Digital Yuan last Friday, 48 hours after that, 7 major central banks in the West got together, including the Federal Reserve, US Federal Reserve, the British Central Bank, the Swiss Central Bank, Japanese Central Bank, and the EU Central Bank. And the reason why they got together is because they want to start to make the arrangements for what type of digital currency they're going to have to launch. Basically, what they were doing is catching up to China, because China is in a point of no return. China is moving forward.
Well, we're seeing a profound impact on the US dollar with this.
Well, that's the other aspects of it, Ross. This introduction, or implementation rather, of the digital yuan is going to have a major impact on the global financial market. Now, you hear analysts, especially the ones that deal with currency, saying, no, this will not have any impact on a major dollar. That nonsense. It is nonsense. It will have a major impact on the US dollar, whether we like it or not. Also, because when you look at Bretton Woods system that was implemented after World War II, basically in which the US dollar was this dominant currency by which all the global trade centers around. In other words, to simplify this, if you are country A, you want to do trade with country C, you have to go through country B, which is the United States, as far as conversion of the currency.
When you look at the history of this thing, that was not a bad idea at the time. But that was 73 years ago, and the world's changed a great deal.
Exactly. Well, 70 years ago, you didn't have China. China 25 years ago was not sitting on the international table for any international agreement or whatever. Only 30 years ago. Things have changed, of course. And this is where the concern now, why the dollar is weakening slowly. And this is what prompted the Federal Reserve to move forward with not only with the meeting that they had, but also the introduction of the digital dollar.
You know, we're looking at the long-term plan, and we looked at China and Russia.
That is an interesting point, Ross. Interesting enough is that we talked about this one in one of our shows, how China and Russia met together to decide on a treaty by which to dump the US dollar altogether. In other words, any bilateral trades between the two of them will not involve the US dollar as a conversion at all. Interesting enough is that the treaty that China and Russia entered into, it's going to be launched in 2025. So the way I see it is that the implementation of this digital yuan in Shenzhen is paving the way for that. That's just one small trial, but it's going to go on a global level.
We're also most likely going to see trade between non-favored U.S. countries being much easier to do trade worldwide.
Well, that's a plus for those countries, including China and Russia. Why? It's because the digital yuan, at least for China, will allow it to avoid U.S. sanctions, arms embargo, regulations regarding any other aspects of financial transactions, because you don't need the dollar anymore. So the dollar will become sort of worthless in the sense that that's why China is pushing for that. Now, other countries who's going to be trading with China, they're going to see the benefit into that. Why do we want to have to depend on the US dollar? Dump all that stuff and use a digital currency. So that's one of the advantages on that aspect.
You know, there are two other considerations here, and that is, one, countries and companies are going to want to invest in China because there's 1.4 billion people there. It's a big market. The second thing is the hunger for cheap commodities is not going to go away.
Well, that's for sure. Do we want to pay $400 for a pair of Nike here in the
No,
U.S.?
I can get it for 75.
I don't think so. So countries going to be thinking in those terms as to, because if I were to advise Chinese government, all I'm going to say is, sure, you approach country A or country B, whatever, and tell them, sure, we'll be happy to do trade with you, except we would like to do it in a digital one. Now, it's your decision to decide whether you want to do trade with us or not.
And there's some aspect of take it or leave it, because their products are very popular worldwide.
Well, they are, because again, cheap commodity, low prices, nobody will argue against that, regardless of who you are. Because that's how the global economy operates. And China's looking at it from that perspective, but also we cannot ignore the size of the Chinese economy. I know in the West we've talking about China's this, China that. That's nonsense. Reality suggests otherwise. You cannot, these days, ignore the Chinese market into any
All you need
economic
to do is look at
conversation.
the film industry and how they changed the plot, they changed the whole storyline so that a Chinese market will buy it.
Yeah, it's just part of it's a natural progression. China starts to see the opportunities into, for example, why do we want to be dependent on the US dollar? It's almost like what China wants is to get rid of the US strangulation on the global finance from that aspect.
David, what would you say the impact on Americans and the American consumer is with the digital yuan?
Well, that's going to change the behavior, the economic behavior that is, the purchasing aspects of that. And what I mean by that, it's because if China's going to launch, well, it's not is going, it is launching the digital yuan, the United States is already thinking of one also by January. The only problem with that one in the United States is that the central bank will take control over your bank account because it is digital. So, to the consumers in the US, it becomes the question of if the United States does not reach some sort of a trade agreement during the negotiation with the Chinese, we're going to start seeing product or commodities at a higher prices. And again, the higher prices push consumers not to buy things at all. And usually with less purchase, economy sinks. That's just the law of economics.
You know, one of the things we just touched on that I think is an important point is how the Chinese Communist Party is making this so public and enrolling the Chinese people in it. And as I talked to Chinese people when we were in China, they had a great deal more confidence and approval of their government than is in the United States. So this is a good public relations thing. And they also have seen significant hundreds of millions of people coming out of abject poverty into a much more livable way of being alive economically. And what we see in the United States is that these efforts are not being made with the digital dollar. And we now have two generations who are less affluent, with less opportunity in the United States than any time in history.
Yeah, it is unfortunate for us to be thinking in those terms about the United States, what it is economically, but also because there is that lack trust in the government. But at the same time, even some of us, American citizens, do not understand that concept of that the government is for the people, by the people. And when you have a citizenry that is not well informed about its role into how the government ought to operate, the government finds it upon itself to do whatever it wants. That's usually the downside. To
You don't mean the government serves the government, not the people?
Not the people, that's for sure. And this is why anytime the government says, well, we're going to do this because it's good for you, that's a red flag, which means is the reverse. So to go back to your point about the Chinese people, how they are responding to the call of the government, is because the Chinese people have made a commitment to their government as far as trusting the government to move the country forward, and they did, at least for the last 30 years. I'm in a process of compiling now some information. I'm going to be writing a book about China. And one of the things that I try to compare is China 35 years ago and how it progressed throughout that time to what it is today. And it's only going to be moving forward.
You take a look at pictures from 1990 of, say, Shanghai, to visiting modern Shanghai today, you'd say it's a different planet. It is so different. Wood shacks to the most modern architecture in the world. There's some bottom lines and some things to carefully consider here. The economic powerhouse that is awakening in China is enormous. The digital yuan is setting the pace for what's going to happen worldwide. Carefully watch what happens to the digital dollar. Make sure you understand and let your representatives know what you think of it. In our next show, or maybe the next couple of shows, we're going to be showing you the impact of this. Maybe the most important shows that we've done so far. Anyway.
And as always, stay informed. Till next time. Bye-bye.